Okay, we are live.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We are at our East Lansing Study Committee on Independent Police Oversight Commission meeting. It is May 10th, 2021. Appreciate you coming in here and doing our thing tonight, and everyone in the community also joining us as well. We'll go right into roll call, please.
Kathy Boyle.
Kathy Boyle present, attending via Zoom.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Sorry.
We're at our East Lansing Study Committee on Independent Police Oversight Commission meeting. It is May 10th, 2021. Appreciate you coming in.
Attending remotely from my home in East Lansing, Michigan, and I'll get this muted here.
We'll go right into roll call.
Sade Colwood. Kathy Boyle.
Kathy Boyle present.
Kelly Ellsworth Etchison.
Present, attending virtually from East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County.
Chuck Grigsby.
Chuck Grigsby, East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan, present.
Cedric Haro.
Present, attending virtually from Mason, Michigan, Ingham County.
Helen Josephson.
Helen Josephson, present, attending virtually from Oakland County, Michigan.
Chris Root.
Chris Root, attending virtually from East Lansing in Ingham County.
Eric Williams. You're muted, Eric.
I'm in East Lansing, Ingham County, Eric Williams.
Ron Bacon.
Present, attending virtually, East Lansing, Michigan, Clinton County.
And Noel Garcia Jr. and Quentin Tyler told us they were unable to attend.
Thank you, Diane. We'll go ahead into item 1.2, approval of the agenda of May 10th, 2021. I'll look for a motion to approve. Moved by Vice Chair Root and seconded by Commissioner Haro. Is there any discussion in regards to the agenda tonight? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. If you happen to have your camera off, the voice will be just fine for the votes there. So I know there's things going on, so no worries at all with that as far as when we make those motions there. All right, we'll move to item 1.3, approval of the minutes of April 26, 2021. I'll look for a motion to approve that as well.
Motion.
Moved by Commissioner Josephson, seconded by Vice Chair Root. Is there any discussion in regards to the 26th of April minutes? All those in favor, please say aye. Is there anyone opposed? Being none, so moved. All right, we'll go right into written communications 1.4, and that is listed there. It's just our resolution that we had submitted prior to the city attorney's report back. So I think that's just there for us to have a point for reference, if I'm not mistaken. And we'll go ahead and move on, unless anyone had any questions or wanted to comment on that. All right. All right, we'll move to item 1.5. First, do we have anyone on the line by chance, Justin?
No, we do not have anybody in the queue.
Okay. We'll go ahead and skip item 1.5 and 2 and go right into item 3.1, old business. And as you can see there, we have the two listed documents and links to what we have for our recommendations. And so we just kind of, I think here are at a point where before we jump in, we kind of really want to have a good game of attack in our approach about how we want to do this, these two pieces of information and how we want to kind of present it and move forward. And I was emailing with Commissioner Boyle and talked with Vice Chair Root and Commissioner Williams, all independently about this. And I was just hoping if you could please, Commissioner Boyle, kind of maybe explain a process that we can do this in a way that's very efficient.
Yes, I've got some notes here. I may refer to them to make sure that I keep on track. I reviewed all of the attorney's comments. There are 64 in all, plus some additional suggested changes in the wording of our report. And I've sort of been thinking about how best we could handle all of that. I don't think we want to sit at a meeting and go through each of the 64 comments individually and make a response to each comment. I think that would take an enormous amount of time and not be necessarily productive. And I'm not sure that we want to be doing any substantial revisions to our report, because if we do that in response to the attorney's comments, then are we going to send it back to the attorney again, thereby delaying it going to council? So what I'd suggest is that we respond to the comments mostly by a memorandum that addresses the things we feel need a response, instead of putting little responses next to each comment on the document. There might be a section or two that we do want to change after we discuss this in a little more detail. But overall, I think we need to send our report to council more or less as drafted. The attorney's comments will be forwarded along with that, I'm sure, if they don't already have them. And then we can also forward our memorandum that contains our thoughts on their comments. Now, for example, the attorneys have suggested changes to the wording of 16 sections of the report. And I think most of those changes are going to be perfectly acceptable to us. And we could just, in our memorandum, say that we agree with the language changes suggested, and we can name each section that they suggested a change in. Also, they've made several comments about collective bargaining and the Public Employment Relations Act. And I don't think we need to respond to those comments. We could just note that they've made the comments and that we understand that the city's bound by the law and by the terms of the collective bargaining agreement. They also cite MCOLs and lien. Ditto with that. I don't think we need to respond to those comments. There's a couple of comments on the Bullard-Pilecki Employee Right to Know Act, which we mentioned in our comments. It's not really in the proposed ordinance, but it is in the comments. I don't think we need to respond to those comments. And one of the attorneys flagged, I think, 9 sections, which the attorney says may oppose additional duties on the police department. And I think we don't need to respond to each of those comments either. Instead, we could sort of generally state that we understand the proposed commission as structured is going to require work by the police department, but we think that the things we've included in the proposed ordinance are necessary to serve the mission of the Oversight Commission. And so we're just doing a sort of a single response to the 9 comments. There's also some concerns about mediation. I realize our mediation section is not crisp and clear and structurally laid out. I don't know as we want to try and fix it. I think instead we could just say that we hope that the commission would be able to utilize mediation provided that it's agreeable to all of the parties involved. And we could discuss that more tonight. Then there's about 20 other comments from attorneys that don't fit into any of these categories. Some of those I don't think we'll have any problem with. Others we may want to respond to. And I think I have a list of all of those and I have proposed responses to them. But I don't think we need to share that tonight. But I think what we end up with is about 20 comments that we need to look at in addition to these groups of comments that we could address individually as necessary in what I would propose be a memorandum of response to the attorney comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyle, for breaking that down for us. So I'll just ask, generally speaking, do any other commissioners have any comments, questions or alternatives to what Commissioner Boyle has presented us as far as the process of these documents and the content. Yes, Commissioner Williams and Vice Chair Root, please go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Root.
I just was asking, wanting to ask a clarifying question, Kathy, about what things you do think we should go through tonight. You were saying there are 20 comments that aren't in those categories, and we maybe don't want to go through them all. We do have some time to, work through things. So I'm not sure what you're actually suggesting we pay attention to tonight.
Well, certainly we could go through the 20 category, the 20 non-categorized comments tonight. We could look at the mediation section. There's another section, let me think. There's a FOIA section, which I think we might want to reconsider how it's structured. And then there's the 20 non-categories comments, some of which we probably don't need to respond to and can be handled relatively quickly, and others which might require more discussion.
Okay. There's one other point that is not about the lawyers' comments. In this version that was sent to the lawyers, incorporating the comments from our last meeting, there is one new section that was left out. And I wonder if we could, that we agreed to, at 2 weeks ago. So I wonder if we could just point out in tonight's meeting that section needs to be added. It's in the commissioner duties. And the addition was, the commission may make recommendations to the city council about issues to be discussed in negotiations with police unions regarding collective bargaining agreements. It's in our minutes. It just didn't make it into the redraft. And I don't want it to get lost.
Can you read that one more time?
Yes. The commission may make recommendations to the city council about issues to be discussed in negotiations with police unions regarding collective bargaining agreements.
Okay.
It's not about an independent role for the police commission. It's just essentially what Councilmember Bacon asked the study committee for this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if we could just agree to add that in after section G of item G of section 5, commission duties.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Please go ahead, Commissioner Williams.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that approach as outlined by Kathy Boyle. And there's some language that we should probably tighten up, and there's some explanations we should probably put in the comments, and then we can prepare a memorandum. And can I ask a question preliminary? Who are the people that wrote these comments? I see their initials, but I don't have their names.
So I can call, one is Shelley, do you want to give the associate or the partner for Keller Toma, what was her name?
Her name is Beth Young.
And then for Miller Canfield, it was Laura Genovich, I believe, one of the assistant city attorneys, Laura Genovich from Miller Canfield.
And Chris Root raises an issue about negotiations in collective bargaining. And I'm wondering, especially in light of Ms. Young's comments and some of Ms. Genovich's comments, that we might want to stay out of that arena altogether and not inject ourselves, in the ordinance into the bargaining process. There is authority in the ordinance as written to make recommendations, and that could include recommendations about what we like to see in union contracts, but we don't need to say it explicitly. I think especially in light of the fact that we've gotten these comments from the labor lawyer. We don't make comments to what we think the union should be bargaining for, and we shouldn't make comments about what management should be bargaining for. That's their business.
Well, if you can show me which section you think would allow us to do this without explicitly mentioning it, that would be fine.
I don't know, is it section 5?
Yeah. Which has many
There's
subparts.
a big, long section with commission powers in it. And if
Right,
commission
that's where
can
I
make
thought it was left out.
Commission can make recommendations about anything having to do with its scope. And this would have to do with the scope of the commission. This would be within the scope of the commission. So it's not that the commission is without power to make recommendations about whatever it thinks appropriate. So, it struck me that, going into the negotiations and taking a position on what some party in a labor negotiation should be advocating would be waving a red flag. I've got plenty of things I'd like the police to bargain for, but I wouldn't want to put that in this ordinance. That's my point on that.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Williams. Any other comments before we get started and start looking at these documents in the process, or questions maybe, really with the overall scope pertaining to what we're doing right now? All right, so was someone
We
about to say
need to
something?
make a decision whether we're adding that one or not. I'm willing to leave it out if people think that's the best approach. I thought it was just a secretarial glitch that it was left out.
Yes, Commissioner Boyle?
Well, I don't really think it needs to be there. I mean, I think the commission could make a recommendation with or without that language actually being in the proposed ordinance. So I don't think it's necessary to include it. And one of the suggestions that I was going to make is, as far as our memorandum, was that we acknowledge that the city is subject to provisions of the collective bargaining agreement, and just leave it at that, so that if there's something that's been flagged by the attorney that says this might be impacted by the collective bargaining agreement, we've recognized that, and the city will deal with that, certainly, as to whether or not they can do it the way we've drafted it or not. But I don't think we have to resolve an issue with the collective bargaining agreement.
Okay, we can leave it as is without the explicit language. Thanks.
So can you tell me, we're talking about section 5, what part?
We're not going to do anything with it. I've withdrawn the reference to the discussion at the last meeting.
Okay, all right, sorry about that. I got a little confused there. Okay, so anything else from any other commissioners' comments before we get started? All right, so I'll jump back here to, so we start off for item 3.1, the first line item there, and this is involving the labor attorney and their responses to what we have going on. And we can start on page 6, I believe, for the notes there, Justin. Can you pull that up by chance? Now, just so I understand, and I may need a little bit of assist from maybe Commissioner Boyle or Commissioner Williams in regards to that, but when we talk about these inquiries or this responses from the city attorney on this type of stuff here, this is not really, I mean, these are just things that we need to know, or, there's not really very much of a response that we're like doing. Am I getting that wrong?
No,
Okay.
I'd agree that this first of all, this is just in our comments, which is the background for why we drafted it the way we did. But second of all, this is just a discussion of Bullard, Pilecki, and Foy and all these other things. We don't have to respond to the attorney's comments. The attorneys made their comments unless it caused us to want to change something, but I don't think it does.
All right. And I mean, I know this is painful, but I think we need to at least acknowledge what those comments are, just for the public, just in case they're not able to see what we're seeing or hearing what we're hearing in regards to that. So if someone could read that section, I can do it. I know I've been doing a lot of reading and things like that, but I'm more than willing to let anyone else who wants to tackle that first section there and read that off just for transparency. Does anyone want to step up and do that by chance?
I can read it.
Please.
What page are we on?
We're on page 6.
Do we need to read the entire comment or maybe just the first paragraph? I'm just thinking about how we're going to get through all of them.
Well, it might be worthwhile to read the whole comment just so we have a flavor of what this is going to be like if we read every comment.
Okay.
I have a maybe I have the wrong agenda, but I have something that starts on page 63 to 144. Is that?
So it would be 68, page
Eric,
68, Eric.
Yeah.
Page 68?
Yeah.
Okay.
there are two separate sets of our report, one with comments from one attorney and the other with comments from the other attorney. So this is page 6 of Attorney BAY's comments.
Okay. That's BAY1?
That's right.
Okay.
Which
Yeah,
is also
I
on
had-
page 68.
I had noted them by the little comment number they have. Okay,
That's-
BAY1.
That's the way I had them noted too, so. So you want me to read it?
We're gonna be here.
Please
all
go
night.
ahead.
Okay. Comment BA1. Personnel records are not per se confidential under the Bullard-Pilecki Employee Right to Know Act MCL 423.506 does not altogether prohibit release of information regarding employee disciplinary action to a third party. Rather, this section merely requires that notice be given to the employee prior to the release of such information. Note, however, that MCL 423.507 does prohibit the release of disciplinary information that is more than 4 years old, with specified exceptions. FOIA exemption of law enforcement personnel records is subject to a balancing test. The appropriate determination is whether the public interest in non-disclosure outweighs the public interest in disclosure. In any event, with exceptions for private personnel information, which would result in an unwarranted invasion of privacy, the city is not required to withhold police personnel records from disclosure, even if they are deemed exempt. To the extent the city does not withhold police personnel records from disclosure, Bullard-Pilecki does not on its own render personnel records confidential. Michigan statute aside, the CBA, meaning collective bargaining agreement, between the city and the POAM addresses the content and confidentiality of personnel records. Based on the language of Article 27.15 of the CBA, personal records may be disclosed to a list of specified individuals, including, quote, other persons acting in compliance with state, federal, or local law, close quote. The commission likely meets this definition. The COAM collective bargaining agreement does not specifically address personnel records. So I don't think we need to respond to that. And I don't think we really need to respond to any of the mentions of Bullard-Pilecki. We could just do a simple statement that there are comments and we recognize that the city's subject to those provisions.
So based on what she's suggesting, Commissioner Boyle, did everyone get a chance to really go through and thoroughly look at the submissions by the attorneys in a way that we can feel that we can address that in our memorandum as a whole? Or did you want to have something specific within these that you wanted to really maybe question or break down or understand better? Yes, Commissioner Williams, please go ahead.
Throughout these comments and the draft that we produced, there's something we could probably say more clearly in at least the comments to the ordinance about these discretionary FOIA exemptions. Because it looks like both lawyers were commented about it, and maybe it's ambiguous or confusing. So, I'm thinking that there might be something we can put by way of explanation in the comments themselves, our comments to our ordinance, that might make it a little bit more clear. We're talking about exemptions that the city has discretion to claim versus exemptions that the city has no discretion but must claim. So,
Commissioner Boyle, please go ahead.
Well, it occurred to me when I was reading this through with the comments that the proposal isn't completely clear about FOIA exemptions that are discretionary with the city or subject to a weighing test. And if our intent is that the city will never invoke a discretionary exemption, we don't really say that. And I'm not sure that should be our intention, but maybe we need to decide whether that's our intention. But
Yeah.
Really, when you come down to the bottom line here, we're not requesting these documents under FOIA. We're just referencing FOIA because we say that the city doesn't have to disclose things to us that are protected by law. And a FOIA exemption would protect the disclosure of a document by law.
Does that help, Commissioner Williams?
Yeah, but maybe there's something we can say in at least the comments to be more clear about that. And
I agree. I think if we want to say, if the exemption is discretionary, the city's not going to raise it, they're going to give us the information, then I think we need to say that. We can say it in our comments, or we can address it specifically in the words of our proposed ordinance.
I got a question in regards to this memorandum that we're referenced to and how we're going to. So we need to figure out who is qualified and willing to kind of really bring this together with that, as far as who's going to be doing this work. So I don't know if it's a little premature right now, but as we go along through this process, I don't want to miss anything, and I want to make sure that we're consistent with how we want to have this formatted out. Are any commissioners interested in working in having a draft memorandum that we can kind of really start working on as we're going through this tonight? So when we come back, we'll have an opportunity to look at everything we talked with in our memorandum for our final meeting. Does that make sense, how I'm asking that? Yes, Commissioner Boyle.
I'll volunteer to work on that with someone.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. It's a little bit outside my skill set. You don't want me as a partner because all you would do is be carrying me. But I was wondering if there's any other commissioners that would be willing to work with Commissioner Boyle in regards to this memorandum that we're going to need to have. That's going to be really, really important to address a lot of what we're talking about tonight. Yes, Commissioner Williams.
I'm of course interested. The one thing that Kathy Boyle mentioned, and it's a decision we have probably avoided but need to face, And that is, are we saying that the committee, that the city should not exercise a discretionary exemption? If the city has a choice between releasing something and not releasing it, is the city going to release it? So is that, in other words, is the police department going to release it to the commission? Is the commission going to release it to the public? Any information, unless it's forbidden to release the information. And we should probably make that decision clearly.
Do you mean things like addresses of officers, personnel file stuff? I mean, what level of, because there's such a range of stuff in a personnel file. There's training documents, there's degrees and background and when you went to the academy, but there's also, you know, personal stuff, right? Personal identifying stuff like addresses.
Mhm.
You have to then look through and see what level of stuff would be given and what wouldn't, and rather than a blanket.
Because this draft says that if the city has a choice, it will release.
And the attorney said it's a balancing test, right? It's a balancing test. It's neither yes or no.
It doesn't say anything about a balancing test.
No, but the attorney said that in their comment.
Right, right.
So without any more direction, the default is we do the balancing test internally. And you're saying, do you want to make a statement of whether we have to give it or not and not have a balancing test?
So if we want to use the balancing test, we should probably put it in the ordinance, in the recommended ordinance. Because as it's written, everything is released to the public.
Well, could I suggest, and that's why it's really something we needed to discuss about the exempt documents. It would seem to me that if it's a discretionary exemption, the police department might choose to just release it to the commission. If that's what happens, no problem. If it's discretionary and they decide not to release it, they have to have a redaction and explain to us what they've redacted. So we could then appeal that. I would suggest the commission could appeal that decision to the city manager and or city council. So you would get another crack at getting the information. Yet you wouldn't have an ordinance that binds the police department to release everything, not claim any exemptions, and end up releasing information that the commission doesn't even need or want.
I like
That would
that
otherwise
idea.
be exempt.
Mhm. Yeah, that's how it's written, is that the police department can claim an exemption and produce that summary of the information that it is not releasing. And if the commission wants to run with that summary, the commission can run with it. If there's a disagreement, we can take that. There's a provision in the rules that we take that to city council and they write up a little opinion.
Yeah, I think the problem comes with some specific language. Let me see. Okay, section 24D, I think might be, let's take a look at that. It says, the police department shall not require the commission to file a Freedom of Information Act request as a prerequisite or assert a discretionary exemption as justification for denying the commission's information request. So that's what gives the impression that we're saying the city or the police department, you can't invoke a discretionary exemption under FOIA. They have to release everything. And if that's not our intent, then I think we might want to strike that sentence.
Yeah, that's what we have to decide. I think that's the kind of the crux of that information transfer issue.
Right, and you know, you've described what, you know, they redact it, we get the redacted version and we can run with that. Or I would assume we could always appeal the denial to either the city manager or the council and see if they would release it if we gave them a good reason why we needed it.
I get the impression that, you know, there is a strong sentiment that everything should be released. And on, at least on one side, there's a strong sentiment that everything should be released. On the other side, I would think on the city side, there's a strong sentiment that not everything should be released. So, I mean, we need to decide, make a decision on that.
Well, council's going to be the one who actually makes the decision on that. But we need to decide what we're going to recommend to council, I think.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess the question is, do we want to strike that sentence in D for section 25 or change it in a way that reads differently? Is that where we're at with that? Because I'm trying to keep up with how best to come to a solution to this section that Commissioner Williams wants to get resolved.
It's, you know, it's possible to kick the can down the line, but we'll be talking about it for a long time.
Well, I guess my suggestion would be on this is if it's the consensus of the committee that we want everything released, I mean, that could be people's personal cell numbers. That would be probably in the police records regarding the employees, or home addresses, all sorts of things that the commission wouldn't need that are normally exempt from disclosure.
Mhm. Now, it's possible to say it could be make an addition to that and say, subject to our section 22 on redactions, the city can release everything. Must release everything. This police department releases everything that the commission asked for. And if it would be the police department's choice to assert an exemption.
Well, I think if we request, yes, if it's a discretionary exemption, then they're the ones who are exercising the discretion and saying, we're not giving it to you. We can ask for everything. If you leave this sentence in, if we leave this sentence in section 24, it looks like the city is saying, because it'll be the city's ordinance, that all of the information that would be subject to a discretionary exemption will be released because the exemption is discretionary and we're not going to exercise our discretion. I mean, if you leave that sentence in, that's really what the ordinance is saying. I'm not sure we need that.
I tend to agree. Does anyone have any other comments on the sentence and leaving it in or taking it out with discretion?
I remember we had a whole lot of comments from the public on don't let the police department use the FOIA to keep information from us. People said that over and over.
Yes, Commissioner Ellsworth-Hutchinson.
Yes, and you'll see in the, there's an attached document where I put together a spreadsheet of all of the comments from the public as it relates to, and I broke it into the sections of the questions. So accountability, transparency, trust, and so forth. And then I plugged in. And so Commissioner Williams, you're right. there were multiple times, you know, of course, I didn't necessarily note it every single time that it was mentioned, but there were multiple times as I went through and read every single comment, so I knew where to place it in the spreadsheet, where the public absolutely does not want the permanent seated commission to have to use FOIA to get information.
Well, we know
And
we're not going to have to use FOIA. We know we're not using FOIA to get the information.
We do.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's clear that that the commission is getting the information from the police department without.
We know that.
Yeah, I think that's clear from the ordinance.
Okay.
The issue is, can the
so the-
police department use an exemption in FOIA
Exactly,
to block that exchange of information?
exactly. But we don't have to file a FOIA to get the information.
Right. I don't have that strong sense that you have, Kathy. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be here as a group. If there was this cooperation that's been going on in the city all this time.
No, I'm
But-
talking about what the ordinance provides.
No, I understand what you're saying.
I think Kathy's
It
talking about
says-
what our recommendation.
Yeah. Our
No,
recommendation-
right, but they have to get approved and we'll just see. I mean, we'll just see.
I mean.
I understand what we're recommending, but I'm just saying that if everybody played nice in the sandbox together, there would be no need for this oversight body to even be stood up.
So what do you propose to like make the recommendation better then, to your points?
Are you
Or
talking
is
to
it
me?
okay the way it is? Yeah, like is it okay the way it is, or is there something you think we should add or change, or?
I mean, I think we can't make assumptions that we'll just get whatever we ask for. I'm making the statement of what the community during the community input session made it clear. And I'm basically supporting what Eric said was the community wants to make sure, and they made it clear in their comments, that we don't have to, that we should be able to get information and not have to FOIA it. So I understand we're putting it in our document, but I'm still, just because we have something in the document, I'm not of the impression that it means we'll automatically get what we're asking for.
I wouldn't mind jumping in here. I mean, if we're directed by council through an ordinance to provide information, ourselves, the police department, are going to provide that information. There's no doubt in my mind about that. I mean, if we get to things like addresses and personal identifying information, I don't think anyone wants that information to be going out on people. I don't think that's the intent of this. It's the intent to be able to fulfill the commission's job. And certainly that's why we're here. We're going to be providing any and all information that's needed to do that. And whatever council tells us to provide through an ordinance, we're going to provide. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But I
Thank
wouldn't
you,
want to
City
provide
Manager.
addresses. So I wouldn't want to provide people's addresses and that type of thing.
Yeah. No, it's possible that the commission is not going to ask for that kind of information. And I mean, do you want to trust the commission not to ask for the home addresses of police officers or their dogs' names?
I guess if you ask for applications and that type of thing, and then that's on there, do you redact it or do you not redact it? Do you take it off? Do you, so that's the type of thing that if you ask for a document and it has that information on it, what do you do with that? Do you just give it, or do you say, well, wait a minute, you didn't intend for it to have this personal identifying stuff, so I'll line it out, and then we're not complying? So I think clear direction on that type of thing would be useful.
Yeah. Now, in our section 22, there's almost an independent section that says the police department can redact things.
Okay, great.
And that, I guess logically, that section 22 on redactions stands independently of section 21, is it 21?
24 is what we were,
24, independently of that instruction in 24, that everything is released. So we're saying, we're blowing hot and cold at the same time. We're saying everything is released, but we're also saying if the police department makes redactions, we go through this process. So we could be comfortable with saying, with giving those two ostensibly conflicting instructions. I guess I'm comfortable with doing it that way. That would leave the, you know, that would leave some ambiguities, but life is ambiguous.
I wonder if I could, I mean, if we're going to respond to this with in the memorandum, perhaps we could acknowledge that apparent ambiguity and explain that although we're not looking for personal information, and we don't think that would be requested, we just don't want to lose out on important information that might be subject to a discretionary exemption, and just explain that and send the ordinance forward the way it is.
Perfect. Yes, there you go for me. And I see a couple of head nods over there. I know Commissioner Haro wanted to jump in there. Go ahead, please.
I was going to raise a similar suggestion to Commissioner Boyle, so she covered it.
All right. So are we good? Are you, I know Commissioner Ellsworth Edgerton, are you okay with that?
Again, I was backing up what Eric Williams stated about the public wanting to make sure we didn't have to FOIA, and I'm stating that in the document that I provided, the comments to that fact.
So I think this scratches that itch. We're saying that you can't use a FOIA exemption if it's discretionary.
Well, and we're also saying that we don't have to file a FOIA. We shall not require the commission to
Right.
file a Freedom of Information Act request. So that's pretty clear.
Because even, you know, these departments will sometimes, you know, pick an apple off the FOIA tree, even though it's not a FOIA case, even though you haven't asked for it under FOIA. They'll say, oh, there's a FOIA exemption, I'm not going to give it to you.
Right, because they'll say, you know, it's not required by law because there's an exemption. That's, I mean, that's why the exemption issue comes up.
But I think your formula, let's explain the ambiguity and leave it at that. That might work. And we just fight over it.
Anything else before we move on? So did we agree that we're going to go through this real quickly and have everyone, and believing everyone had a chance to really look at this? It's going to be addressed in totality with the memorandum through the work of Commissioner Boyle and Commissioner Williams, unless there's specific things that people want to talk about, because we have a whole nother section of things to get to. And this is kind of something, unless there's something in there like we just discussed where you want to really have a decision made based on that, we're going to address it in our memorandum, and it's going to be presented for us to look at in our next meeting. So I just want to make sure everyone understands why we're moving on and what is coming next with the first part of what we've been doing so far. Does anyone have questions, comments, or concerns with that at all before we move on? All right. And, you know, I have Vice Chair, I have Commissioner Williams and Commissioner Boyle. You have a lot of expertise in some of this stuff that's going on. So please interrupt me at any point in time if I am missing something, because this is quite a bit and complex in regards to making sure we get this thing right. So don't be shy on that, okay? I really need your help on that tonight. All right, so before we move on, I just want to make sure we're good to go ahead and move on. All right, let me jump out of here. And so we're going to we're still in 3.1. We're going to go to Police Oversight Commission Orders Draft with FSCS comments. And that's a little bit more of what we really need to get through and understand and come to consensus with. You know, if we get to a point, we may have to make some very basic decisions with our votes with it if we can't come to that. But I kind of really want to look at this thing more as a whole, and then addressing a lot of this as we've been talking about with our memorandum, with some of the dramatic things that we really want to make sure we're clear with as to why or what our responses is to what we have there for what they have responded to with us for the city attorney. So I want to make sure we have that laid up so we understand that. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. So if I'm not mistaken, when we move to the second link there on 3.1, we start out at page 3. And it's under the content section. And it's just a little language change there. Any responses, comments about that? So we're in the second link on 3.1, Commissioner Williams.
What is it out of 178?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
105.
105.
We're all where we need to be. And it's up on the screen as well, Commissioner Williams. Basically what that is section 15 and section 16 under reports in the content section, just a language change, encounters with people experiencing homelessness. And then 16 is encounters with people experiencing mental illness. Any responses, questions, or changes for that before we move on?
I just note that's also changed in the language of the ordinance later on. The same change is made.
That reminds me of my Jimi Hendrix days.
Are you experienced?
Right, right. It makes homelessness look like a trip, you know, like a wonderful thing to experience. You know, it seems so politically correct. Experiencing homelessness.
I think the idea is to not identify someone by their characteristic of homelessness, but to identify them as a person who is experiencing homelessness.
Because we did call them people.
Yeah.
I mean, they are. So we didn't say that with he didn't suggest that with juveniles. You know, he didn't say, you know, police encounters with people experiencing youth.
I'm in favor of the changes personally.
Yeah, I listed that as changes that we wouldn't object to. That was on my list of things we wouldn't object to. So I agree with that.
If that's on your list, let's go on.
All right, so we'll move on to, it looks like section or page 5, and we're under section 2, definitions, and they're citing B, and comment there is a document can be exempt from disclosure, i.e. FOIA, without there necessarily being a legal duty to disclose its contents. Recommend striking the last clause so the confidential information includes all material exempt from disclosure, regardless of whether it is a special legal duty to not disclose it. City shall keep in mind that the lien information can only be disclosed in limited circumstances and likely cannot be turned over to the commission. Reactions, comments? Yes, Commissioner Williams.
I'm sorry, I have 2 comments on that. One has to do with what we just discussed. We're going to push for all information and not allow the assertion of discretionary exemptions. So that would suggest that we only recognize exemptions that are create a legal duty not to disclose. The other response is with respect to lien. There is a statute, Criminal Justice Information System statute, that makes lien information not disclosable to the public. The lien system, the fingerprint system, and other criminal justice information systems are covered by a statute. So it looks like the writer doesn't know about the existence of that statute. There is a statute.
Or they were just saying that to remind people. I mean, not necessarily they didn't know about it.
Uh-huh.
Because community members might not know that that exists. So that's like maybe just a way to just remind people.
Mhm. But that's no reason not to take, to cross out that last phrase, that last clause, subject to a legal duty not to disclose.
So in the memorandum, you want to address that, if I understand you, Commissioner Williams, as far as leaving as is, as opposed to just responding to it in the memorandum that makes no difference because of the state statute?
Right. Or both. Is this,
Okay,
Ms. Boyle, is this one of the things that you're not going to change? You're not proposing that we don't change?
okay, I listed that as one that we wouldn't object to the change. I didn't think it was a substantial difference. If you think it is, then certainly we don't have to agree with the change. I guess I'm wondering what you think the difference would make as far as the information that we get if this phrase is struck. If it's exempt from disclosure by statute, isn't it subject to a legal duty not to be disclosed?
I think the people that wrote these comments think that if it's a discretionary exemption in the Freedom of Information Act, it's confidential information. And it is exempt by statute. I get the impression that that's their reading of the Freedom of Information Act.
Well, then I think perhaps that particular question is got to be addressed in the memorandum's comments regarding discretionary exemptions and the committee's feeling about discretionary exemptions shouldn't be invoked.
Right.
But I don't know that leaving this phrase in impacts the discretionary exemption question.
You seem to agree that there is such a thing as a discretionary exemption.
Well, there are may not disclose, MAY,
Right.
I think is in the statute.
And I
Right.
read that may too. But
Right.
it looks like whoever wrote this comment doesn't agree with that reading.
Well, I'm not sure that that's correct. I'm not sure that that's their agreement. But my question is, what do you get if you leave that phrase in that you wouldn't get if you struck it out? I don't think there's anything. We have a question, as to discretionary exemptions and whether they should absolutely be prohibited and everything has to come to us or not. I mean, I think we have a question about that and we need to address that in our memorandum. But I don't think that the inclusion or deletion of this phrase impacts the discretionary exemption question. I don't think it clarifies it. So that's why I would not object to striking it.
I mean, I agree that given the tenor of this comment and a good portion of all the rest of them, there is need for clarification about what we're talking about discretionary exemptions and what our proposed policy is. And so somewhere we need to make that clarification. If not in this sentence, we need to make it somewhere.
Yeah, and my suggestion is we accept this proposed change, and we're going to deal with the question of discretionary exemptions under FOIA as to whether they're going to be used as a reason not to release stuff to the commission. We'll deal with that in our comments in the memorandum, which could include the fact that many of the public speakers stated that they didn't want the city using FOIA or the police department using FOIA to block information. So that's support for the importance of the commission being able to get all of the information it needs.
Do you think we need a definition of exempted from disclosure by statute?
No.
That's clear.
Well, I think it's clear, yes.
I think it's clear. I think it's clear.
Yeah, I think that our issue is the discretionary exemptions. And I think we have different ideas about that, but I think the way we deal with that is that we flag the issue in the memorandum, explain why the committee feels that the city shouldn't refuse pertinent information because there's a permissive or discretionary exemption under FOIA.
And do you think that anybody in the future reading this ordinance, the bare black letter text of the ordinance, is going to get that clear message?
Well, Lordy, that's what lawyers are paid their big bucks for, is to fight over what the language of the statute means, isn't it? So no, of course, not everybody's going to agree. But I don't think the phrase adds to, I don't think it adds clarification. I don't think it adds to that particular subparagraph. And again, I acknowledge that there's a question about discretionary exemptions under FOIA. I think we need to confront that and explain the committee's position on it and why there's that position. And we can leave, if we leave the ambiguity that is there right now that says the city won't use a discretionary exemption, then I think we're covered.
Okay.
All right, so
we could strike this.
What was that last part, Commissioner Boyle?
So we could strike the phrase they've suggested we strike.
All right, and it will be addressed in our memorandum, and then we'll address the overall issue when we get to the discussion of the FOIA. Is that good with you, Commissioner Williams?
We'll address the overall issue when we get to discussion of the FOIA. Oh, okay. I think at some point in the lower down in the ordinance, we need to be clear about what we're aiming at.
Understood. All right, we will move to section 3, and we have looks like starting with subsection C. And I apologize, the print is really small. To do this, the city will likely need to appoint some of the first members to terms that are shorter than 3 years so that the term endings will be staggered. Any comments?
Of course, that's true. The city council is going to realize that right away. I don't think we need to respond to the comment.
Okay, anyone else? All right, the second section there is referring to section 3, subsection D, is the only basis for removal. The city may wish to provide other grounds like failure to attend meetings and create a section listing all grounds for removal. Same thing, I think. Yes, Vice Chair Rowe, please go ahead.
A draft ordinance does say explicitly that this commission would be abiding by the general provisions in the ordinance about commissions. And there is a section there about if people miss too many meetings, they lose their seat. So I think it's already stated unequivocally that would apply to this commission as well. So I don't think it needs to be said again.
Anyone else? Thanks, Vice Chair Root. Then I think we kind of addressed this one here. Consider rephrasing to people experiencing homelessness and people experiencing mental illness, emphasis on people rather than the ailment. All right, we'll go to page 8, section 5. Looks like subsection. Well, there is some minor word changes in there. So if I'm seeing this and I don't, if it's not something that someone has an issue with, we'll consider those acceptable as opposed to going through every single thing with that. And I'll just go to the comments directly. So we're at section 5, subsection B. And will the city investigate based on a single individual's request, or does it require a petition under subsection C? Yes, Vice Chair Rowe?
I suggest that we could put a comment in the memo explaining the difference between B and C and pointing out that one of them says shall and the other one says may. One of them talks about an investigation, one of them does not talk about an investigation, and that what we're saying is what we mean. I think we could maybe just have a comment that explains our intention a little bit more. But I don't think there's a disagreement or problem of what we're actually trying to get across.
Commissioner Boyle?
Yeah, I think they just didn't, whoever did these comments didn't read this portion very carefully. I think it's pretty clear the way it's written. And I agree with Vice Chair Root that the way to address that is just a brief comment in our memorandum that says, we may investigate an individual complaint. We must have a hearing if there's a petition signed by 20 residents.
Understood. We'll move on. Did you indicate, Commissioner Rowe, something? Was that your hand? Oh, okay. I think we already addressed this, but we're in section 5, subsection F. I'm concerned that the city could run afoul of the collective bargaining agreement by reporting officers to IMCO. And did we already talk about not worrying about that? And everyone's okay with that collectively? All right, I'll go ahead and move on if I don't see anything. We're now to still in section 5, subsection K. And would the commission make these recommendations to the city council or the police department?
Well, I think if you read the ordinance again as a whole, I think the intention is that the recommendation be made to the police department.
Maybe they missed that when they were going through this overall thing, with the time frame that they had. I don't know, but I'll go ahead and move on. And we're on subsection L of the same section of 5, rewarding for clarity is what they're looking for on that. And they're striking a little bit what we have to say. Does anyone have any response to that we could throw in the memorandum? Vice Chair Root, please.
I think the rewording is fine.
All right, we'll move on unless someone else has something else with that section. We're down to subsection O of 5. Sorry, I'm looking at the screen and reading my paper here. The city may wish to clarify the scope of this communication Commission would not, for example, be authorized to make policy coverage changes. Any response to that in regards to our memorandum and how we want to have that be looked at, or leave it alone?
I would leave that alone. I can't imagine that anybody would read this and say that the commission is going to make changes in the insurance policy.
I would agree.
All right. All right. I'm just making sure. We just got to be, very clear. So we'll move, if I'm not mistaken, to section 8. And we're at subsection A. Perhaps say recommend, as the commission cannot implement practice changes. Responses?
I think we should just clarify. I think they've misread what we intend there. The new practices are commission practices in that particular section, I believe. So if we just reword it so it says we'll keep informed and inaugurate new commission practices that appear to be of benefit to the commission's service and to the public. Because I think this particular section A, 8A, just deals with the commission's work and how the commission is doing things.
Absolutely. Just put that bad boy right into that memorandum. All right. We'll go ahead and move on to, I apologize. We're in section B of section 8, we're at section 8, subsection C, if I'm not mistaken. And we are at do members pay their own dues, fees, or is the city paying those dues, fees? Yes, Vice Chair Root?
I suggest that we add a comment with the example of NACOL, which I think is the organization that probably would be most likely to seek membership in, and that they provide a membership for the group of people who are constituted as an oversight commission, and that's $400. So I think that would be a good example to put in a comment.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is there anyone wants to add to that?
And I believe section 10 deals with budget, and there's a line in there for commissioner education. So, I mean, that's part of the city funding.
I agree, but I think Chris's suggestion about NACOL is a good one as far as including it in the memorandum. We might want to do that, and it would apply to every time something like that comes up.
It would be an
Good,
example.
that's what we shall do. Good. I'm sorry, Vice Chair, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Okay. We'll go ahead and move on to now of the same, we're at section 10, subsection. Well, it doesn't have, so I'll just say section 10 of the budget. We have some concern about mandating the city manager make a recommendation for specific financial support. Does anyone want to tackle that? Yes, Commissioner Boyle?
Again, there's a lot of things where financial commitments are flagged in here. And I think the way to deal with that is the comments are there. We're not gonna, with a few exceptions like Vice Chair Root's suggestion about the cost benefit of NACOL membership. But normally when they're flagging the expenditure things, I think we just put a general comment into the effect that we understand that the city has a budget process and that the commission is going to require expenditures, and that the things we've included in the proposed ordinance are things that we think are important and necessary to the commission's work. And then we're not arguing each one individually.
Understood. We'll go ahead and move on then. If I'm not mistaken, I think we're going to go all the way down to section 12. And under evaluations, And so does this come out of the commission's budget? And I think Commissioner Boyle kind of addressed that, for how we're going to look at the budgetary things, unless someone wanted to chime in. Yes, Vice Chair Root.
Regarding the second comment of that section about does the city want to include standards that the commission should meet and that the outside agency would be evaluating, I suggest that we add a comment saying that when an evaluation is
Do?
Thank you. The way the city does that is create an RFP, and that the RFP would explain what the evaluation is supposed to include. That's quite standard procedure. And I suggest that because the first evaluation after 4 years might be quite different from a fourth evaluation in 16 years. So I think it's better not to get into a great deal of detail in the ordinance and let people be creative about what the city council and the oversight commission, and the city government is really interested in at a particular period of time. And that can be stated in an RFP.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We'll go ahead and move on. All right, we'll move to section 13. And we're looking at first subsection A. What will this entail is the question there. Will the commission be interviewing witnesses while a criminal investigation is ongoing, or will the commissions only be reviewing closed cases? This could result in interference with a criminal investigation. I'll go ahead and let you guys go ahead and respond to that. Please, Commissioner Williams.
Yeah, I think the intent there, and we should probably change the language, is to say that the commissioner can look at court records. So we're not trying the case. We're not defending or prosecuting anybody. We're just looking at court records. So the commission may investigate and track court records in which the city charges individuals with disorderly conduct.
Yes, Commissioner Boyle.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think they have misunderstood what is intended by this section 13. The reader has misunderstood in that we need to address that in some detail in our memorandum as to what our intention is, whether or not we want to try and redraft the language. I guess Eric and I can discuss that when we work on the memorandum, but I think we just need to make clear what our intention was there, which was clearly to track what's happening with East Lansing cases in the courts, see what happens. So I just think if we explain that, that should address those comments.
Understood, and thank you. We'll move on to same section 13, subsection B. Will this be limited to arrests made in the city of East Lansing or anywhere in Ingham County?
I mean, that's part of what we want to do in describing the intent. I think it's just the intent was East Lansing arrests. Am I
Okay, in the newspaper, online, or both?
Website. Wherever it's, don't we have a provision in there about the commission is going to have a website and it's going to publish things?
I don't think we have
Yeah.
to say it's going to be published. Published just means we're going to issue a report. That's all it means, is we're going to issue a report, and our report can be disseminated however we choose to disseminate, on our website or by giving the report to city council. I'm just not sure why that comment is even there, frankly.
We'll leave it alone then, unless we have some surprises in our memorandum for that. So we'll go to section 12. I think so does this come out of our commission, does this come out of the commission's budget? And then I'll go ahead and read the second one there. Does the city want to include standards that the commission should be meeting? What will be the outside agency be evaluating?
Didn't we just do that?
Yeah, we just did that. Yeah, we were on 13.
Oh, okay, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're on to 14 now, I think.
I told you I was gonna need your help tonight. All right. So we are on section 14, subsection A. And I'll go ahead and read, flagging as this imposes an extra duty on the police department. The city may wish to prepare an appendix or ancillary document that identifies the duties imposed by the ordinance on the police department. This will ensure that all parties are aware of changes to PD procedure that is ordinance would require. So didn't we just do that one?
They
Yeah.
do that throughout the document. It's a similar comment
Right.
throughout the document.
Right.
You know, I
Which-
went through and I listed all those things that they wanted us to flag, and I made a list, and it looks impressive. All the things we're making the police department do. I mean, I think we should use that as an advertisement.
Well, in any event, you know, I think all of those comments are addressed by our memorandum statement that we understand it's imposing some additional duties, but they're important in order to meet the commission's duties. So I don't think we have to address each one individually every time they flag that.
Understood. So
Look
that's
at this. We're asking them to prepare use of force summaries, prepare summaries of encounters with people experiencing homelessness, prepare summaries of encounters with people in crisis, prepare summaries of encounters with juveniles, summaries of biased 9/11 calls, produce a redaction log, separate protocols for disciplinary and policy complaints. That's a wonderful list. You should be proud of that list.
all right. So with that approach, that means that looks like we jump down to section 16, and we're at the second section there, if I'm not mistaken, is how do we define mental illness? Does it include individuals under the influence of drugs? How will an officer know if someone has experienced mental illness? And then they have some examples of depression, panic disorder, the very broad possibilities. So do we want to address that in our memorandum clarification? Yes, Commissioner Boyle?
Well, it seems to me we need to rely on the police to identify these individuals. So we're going to have to rely on their reports to us regarding people who meet this description. There's no other way to do it.
Yes, Commissioner Williams.
When I saw this, and I went and looked at the Chicago consent decree. I looked at the NYPD policy, but there's an excellent discussion of this in the Chicago consent decree. And let me read this for you, if you give me a second. It says, Chicago Police Department officers often serve as first responders to individuals experiencing a behavioral or mental health crisis. These individuals may exhibit symptoms of known, suspected, or perceived behavioral or mental health conditions, including but not limited to mental illness, intellectual or developmental disabilities, or co-occurring conditions such as substance use disorders. The parties acknowledge that having a mental illness, an intellectual or developmental disability, or co-occurring condition does not mean an individual is necessarily in crisis, or that having a behavioral or mental health condition would necessarily be the reason for any crisis that requires police involvement. However, it may need to be considered or warrant heightened sensitivity to ensure an appropriate response. Therefore, individuals in the groups listed above will be collectively referred to as individuals in crisis for purposes of this agreement. So my proposal is that we change the language of the ordinance and call it not people experiencing mental illness, but individuals in crisis, to track that that usage that shows up in the Chicago consent decree. And I would suggest a definition as follows. Individual in crisis means a person who exhibits symptoms of known, suspected, or perceived behavioral or mental health conditions, including but not limited to mental illness, intellectual or developmental disabilities, or substance use disorders.
Does anyone have any response to, and you're talking about changing language in the ordinance itself, not the memorandum, correct?
Right.
All right. Is everyone good with that? Or do we have maybe some debate on that language? Yes, Commissioner Josephson.
It's been a while since I've read the textbook, but I was always taught in like my education that being in a crisis was different than having like a mental illness, and that while they look the same, they are two different things. One is like a crisis where you are not able to like handle your emotions in an isolated incident. That's like the crisis, but the other is a pattern of multiple, maybe like events, multiple calls to that place for a mental illness, because that's not a crisis. That's just a person, like we said, experiencing a mental illness. So personally, I think they're different based on what I like read in my textbooks.
Thank you, Commissioner Josephson. Yes, Commissioner Boyle, go ahead.
Well, so I'm wondering though, what do we want the police department to report to us? Do we want each incident in which there is a interaction with a person in crisis, as Committee Member Williams just defined that? Maybe that would be sufficient for the purposes of what the commission's trying to do, which is to oversee the interactions of with people who are in a crisis situation that's affecting their ability to function.
What do you think about that, Commissioner Josephson?
I was currently trying to find that textbook. I know it was, I think, a community policing textbook I just had. I think it would be sufficient enough. I just think they use the specific word crisis in the text as if that's, I don't have any experience with the ELPD and what they label in their reports, but sometimes are like key terms if like you use a specific one, but it might mean something else. I just want to make sure it correlates with their reports if they use the word in a crisis versus if they use mentally ill. Like, I just want to make sure it correlates to how they like draft the reports. There's going to be no confusion by the commission.
Well, with what committee member, Williams suggested is we've got a specific definition, which is quite detailed of what we mean by individual in crisis. So maybe for the purposes of explaining the reports we need, it'll work.
All right, I see a head nod that she supports. We can go ahead and move on unless there's any more discussion. All right, so if I'm not mixed up here, we jump to section 17, subsection A. And it just kind of has the flagging for extra duty, and we can't really address that unless someone has something to say, or I'll just keep it moving. Okay, so then that puts us up to section 19, Brady lists. And there's a question there. How will the commission investigate lists maintained by private attorneys? Do we want to address that, or how's that work, Commissioner Boyle?
Well, I mean, they can investigate them if they come into possession of them. It doesn't say that they have to come in. That doesn't say anything else. But if they've got a list, if somebody gives them a list, they can investigate it. I don't think we need to explain it.
Anyone else? All right.
Just ask them.
What's that, Commissioner Williams?
Ask them. Defense attorney.
Yeah.
Do you know anybody who's on on the Brady list? Or do you have a Brady list? If they'll tell you or they won't tell you.
Understood. Section 19, same section, subsection B. I am concerned that the city could run afoul of the collective bargaining agreement by reporting and officers to IMCO, and we already addressed that comment. And we'll move on unless I'm mistaken on that. All right, and then same thing with section 20, flagged on additional duty. And we're going to explain that and deal with that as a whole in our memorandum. And so that moves us up to section 21. And then we have subsection A. And then they're just speaking to, so the commission cannot receive lien information, which we've already kind of really addressed the lien issue and how that works. And so I'll move on unless someone had something else to add to that comment. And then, so I was mistaken. So I was just addressing this confidential information, just the section 21. Now we're in subsection A. This is problematic to the extent confidential information is defined above as information exempt from disclosure by statute. Michigan law does not shield information that someone simply promised to keep confidential. And I think we've kind of still addressed that overall, unless I'm mistaken in how that reads. Were you about to say something, Commissioner Boyle?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on this were maybe in the memorandum, give a brief explanation of that the provisions about confidential information are our attempt to be able to review certain confidential information without getting copies of it that is necessary for us under a promise of confidentiality. So we could review it. We wouldn't be requesting copies of it. We then wouldn't have copies of it. It wouldn't be public documents. We'd just be reviewing the information. And I think that was the intent of this section. And I think they've misunderstood this with their comments.
And are you talking about the comments following as well in this section?
Yes.
Okay. So are we comfortable with moving on? And based on what Commissioner Boyle has said, we'll throw that in the memorandum and what we're doing. I see your hand, Commissioner Williams.
I have a question about this, and looking at all this green. These comments are coming from the city attorney, and the city attorney, according to this section 21, is going to be enlisted in this project of screening confidential information. So I'm kind of wondering, given all these green comments, whether the city attorney wants to be involved in it. It kind of gives the city attorney a role. Is the city attorney saying, I don't want to have anything to do with this? It's not something that city attorneys are allowed to do, or that is, if the city attorney was here, I would ask them that question.
See, I think he just misunderstood the tenor of this section. I read this section to say, if there's confidential information as we defined it in the ordinance, in consultation with the city attorney, the commissioner or member can look at the confidential information if they promise not to disclose the information to others, and they won't write anything down about the confidential information. So there won't be any public documents made, or documents which are subject to public disclosure that are made about the confidential information. I think that's what this section intended to say, but it seems to me that's misunderstood by the city attorney, because there's a concern about a public body can't make public information confidential simply by saying it is. So that I read that as somehow the attorney thinking we're going to have these documents, not that we're going to look at them and then not have any copies of them, which is, I think, what the intention this section is. So I think we need to explain what the intention of the section is. And I think with that explanation, they shouldn't need to make all these changes in it.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyle. Thank you, Commissioner Williams. I'll go ahead and move on then, if I'm understanding where we're at, to section 22 with that memorandum explanation for section 21. Talking too much tonight. My lips are starting to twinkle here. All right, so we are at section 22 redactions.
Mhm.
Okay. And we're at subsection A. This raises the question of when the police department is obligated to provide information to the commission. Is this meant to apply both to investigations and the various written reports described above?
Yes.
Do we just want to cite that in the memorandum? Yes.
I think we should clarify that the commission can get any city records that are relevant to anything that comes within the scope of the commission's duties.
All right. I'll go ahead and move on. And I'll offer up, just in case anyone who wants to, they can more than welcome jump in here and do some of the reading of the comments if you want to. No have tos, but if you're interested in doing that, I'll be more than happy to give up the responsibility. All right, I'll go ahead and move on to section B of section 22. Whether particular staff information is a public, my thing cuts off, but I can't see what that word says. Whether particular staff information is a public record or not will be determined by law, is what I think it says. Are we okay with that, or does anyone have any comments?
Are you talking about LJG 38?
No, I'm at LJG 36. Am I off?
Okay, all right, I just skipped it. Oh,
Okay.
No, we don't have to comment on that.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, I'll move on. Now we're on LJG 37, and it's just pretty much been flagged for extra duty, which we'll move on past that. And now we are at comments. This relates to the Bullard-Pulaski Employee Right to Know Act, which involves an employee's access to his or her file. The scope of documents that are public records is determined by FOIA, not the statute. Plawecki, excuse me, I mispronounced that. Yes, Commissioner Boyle?
We don't have to respond to that. I mean, when they're instructing as to what the law is, I don't think we have to respond to that. And particularly when things are in our comments. And that's
All right.
That's in our comments.
All right, so we are moving down to section 24 then. The city council likely cannot delegate the authority because it is conferred by charter on the council. The charter does not provide for delegation. And I think we're not going to worry about that as well, based on what you just said.
Well, I mean, I don't think this delegates power. It just describes what the scope of our ability to investigate things is. So and we might want to comment on that, but.
And the city council runs the city, and
Right.
they have power under the Constitution and state law to to write these ordinances. I don't see why you can. I don't see the basis for this argument.
I don't either. I don't understand why it's described as a delegation of powers under the charter. I mean, the city often delegates things to commissions and committees, and
Right.
this is different than that. So I think it was just meant to describe the scope of what the commission can do to get information. That's very broad.
If a city council couldn't delegate power, cities couldn't do anything.
Particularly with council members who are not full-time employees of the city.
All right, we'll move on, still in section 24. The statute may speak to the category and not to a specific document or specific piece of information.
I don't see I think it's okay to delete specifically. I don't see there's a problem with that.
Anyone else? I think we're good. Got a thumbs up from the vice chair, who's unusually quiet tonight, which I don't understand. All right, we'll go to we're still section 24 and we're down to section D. This seems to read that the city will provide the commission with documents that are exempt from disclosure under FOIA. And so is that something we want to address in the memorandum?
Right, that's what we discussed a little earlier about
Okay.
the two parts of the ordinance that are somewhat in conflict regarding redactions and not invoking or not refusing to release information that's subject to a discretionary exemption. So we're going to deal with that in our memorandum.
All right, and then we're still in section 24, section F, and I think we're not dealing with this at all, but I'll read it. What amount of significant financial burden? And then the second there is this would bind the future council's funding decisions, which likely is not enforceable. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move on. So that makes us jump all the way to section 26.
25C,
Yep, 25C,
that would be a comment 43 and a half. That's what I call it.
On page 27?
yes. See,
Okay.
that specifically says that the city can withhold records that are exempt from disclosure under FOIA, which is contrary to our earlier language that said they won't refuse to release something just because it's exempt under FOIA. And I think we need to deal with that issue in our memorandum.
Anyone else? All right, I'll move on. All right, so we are in section 26, and they're striking some things out here, and it reads, the commission is not separate public body that can sue in its own name. Recommend striking. The second part of that, this is very broad. FOIA litigation can cost tens of thousands of dollars. And the last comment there for the section C, C, D, and E is recommended striking because the commission will not have its own FOIA coordinator. FOIA requests will be processed by the city's clerk's office. And we're addressing that in the memorandum already, correct? Or,
Well,
yes.
Yeah, I think that I have a real problem with this section because to me, this section says the commission can obtain information from other public bodies by submitting a FOIA to them. I don't think the commission needs to do that. I quite frankly can't imagine city council would empower the commission to do that. And I certainly can't imagine that city council would give the commission authority to go out and hire their own attorney if they don't get the information they're requesting from another public body. So I mean, if we want to defend this in our memorandum, we can do it. But I just think, I think it's unnecessary. I think it's causing confusion. I can't imagine that we would ever need it or use it. So I would just delete section 26. I think it's section 26. Yes, section 26. But I suspect that committee member Williams disagrees with me on that.
Kind of. was that as we say in the comments, it's going to be rare. And there are some places where we might wind up, we might ask them information and they would ask us to file a FOIA request. I don't think it's all that important. I think it's going to be rare. I don't think there's going to be a lot of money involved. And I think a letter from a lawyer frequently frees up information that they might not want to give to just an ordinary person. So that we're not talking about litigation, we're just talking about a letter from a lawyer. So,
Well, I just wonder-
I could live with you know what you're saying, you know, deleting the entire section, but I'll appeal to Kelly. If Kelly agrees to get it out, to take it out.
Please, Vice Chair Root, go ahead.
I think it might, in the comment, it does say, as Eric points out, that this would be rare. If we want this section to stay in, it might be helpful if the comment would say what kinds of situations it might be used in. Because otherwise it does sound like this could be an unusually high priority and could be quite costly. So it would be, if we want to keep it in, it might be helpful to have people be able to understand what we're talking about that could be valuable. Why would the Oversight Commission go to another jurisdiction to get information that is within the scope of the Oversight Commission? And that it might be of such high priority that we go through a suit.
Think about the Brady list issue. You want to get somebody's Brady list, the county defender's office, and they say, "Oh, we won't give it to you willy-nilly. File an FOIA request." Or you want to get some documents from 54B District Court, or you want to get some documents from the county 9/11 administrator.
I think FOIA doesn't apply to the court.
Maybe not. Does it apply to the 911 administrator?
I don't know.
Yes, Commissioner Rowe, please go ahead.
There might be a situation in which we're requesting information from the Michigan State Police about an independent investigation where they would turn us down and we would need to file a FOIA.
And they would resist.
So is it realistic, like Vice Chair Root was talking about, maybe having some specific scenarios of why we would want to do that in the memorandum, or am I, or does that not really make sense because we don't know? I mean, I don't know how that would work.
I get the impression that Mrs. Boyle is concerned about hiring, the cost associated with hiring a lawyer, and also the city attorney hiring a lawyer and mounting a lawsuit to get this information. And I'm wondering if there's a way to write this so that we would have the city attorney pursue an FOIA request if there was resistance, up to and including litigation. Can an ordinance command the city attorney to help the commission get information through an FOIA request? Would that be acceptable?
Commissioner Boyle?
Well, first of all, certainly I'm concerned with the cost because FOIA lawsuits can be extremely expensive. I have billed people for a FOIA lawsuit. It was extremely expensive. Went to the Court of Appeals. But I certainly can't imagine council would give us the authority to go out and retain our own counsel. City council would give us authority to go out and retain our own attorney. I just can't imagine that they would do that. Likewise, I kind of question whether they would command the city attorney to pursue a FOIA based on our request, solely on our request, the fact the information's been refused. With that in mind, however, perhaps what we need is, if we're going to keep this section in the proposed ordinance, is to take Vice Chair Root's suggestion and just reference the comments and say, this is the sort of situation we envision that might require us to file a FOIA to get information, and just leave it at that.
I think we all can live with that, unless anyone wants more or different language in regards to memorandum and Vice Chair Root's recommendation.
Just
Can
to
you
push
repeat
this
that?
one bit farther, what if we wrote it in such a way that the commission could recommend to city council that the city pursue this information?
Vice Chair Root and then Commissioner Ellsworth Edgison.
I was thinking of that too, Eric. If it rises to a very high priority, and that might involve a lot of time and money, I think that would be an excellent suggestion. That would be done if the Oversight Commission brings it to the council and the council agrees that it's that important.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, Commissioner Ellsworth Edgison, please go ahead. Thank you for waiting.
No, that's all right. I didn't hear Commissioner Boyle's last comments. I was just asking if she could repeat that. But I do, while I have the floor, I do like where Commissioner Williams and Commissioner Root are now going with having City Council pursue this, because I can certainly see, and I talked about it a few weeks ago in when I sent Commissioner Williams my some comments on, I think it was under the subpoena power, about there will be situations where you might have to go and subpoena an outside agency. So this would be the same, or FOIA, where like the Michigan State Police or someone else, but we might have to still get that information. And so if the city could then do our bidding for us, that would be most helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellsworth Edgison. Any more input before we move on? You were making a statement, Commissioner Ellsworth, so that wasn't a question, right? I just want to make sure I didn't not address what you were concerned about. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no question.
Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and move on. Looks like we are at we're in section 27 now, and we are at will the police department be directed to pass along all complaints to the commission?
Yes.
I think they, are we
It says that.
are we at section 27?
We're at 28.
28, okay, yeah, I think they haven't read this. They hadn't read the whole statute or ordinance when they made that comment. I think it's pretty clear that in section 5A, the complaints all come to us. "35A, excuse me, I can't read my own handwriting. So I think that's clear. We could cover that in the memo, but I think if you read the whole ordinance, it's clear that the complaints are going to come to us.
Vice Chair Root?
I do support the idea that Kathy's raising of making a comment on this, because their next comment is, will the police department I think there's one about, will the police department investigate? Well, I think just referring to the definition section where we talk about complaints, and section 35, it's clear that the police department does the initial investigation. So there are a number of things that are clear in other places, and it might just be good to have the memo point that out.
It reminds me of I had a law professor who used to say there are two rules of statutory interpretation. The first rule is read the statute. The second rule is read the statute again. And I think that the commenting attorney hadn't read the entire statute when the comments were made. So, but we could cover that in the memo.
Ouch. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to section 29. Looks like subsection B, and then well, in accordance, any applicable collective bargaining agreement is what they have there, and I think we're good with that. Unless, oh yes, Vice Chair Root, please go ahead.
I think in section 30, there was an addition of all complaints must include the complainant's name, mailing address, and phone number. I think at one point we discussed that it would be fine for there to be anonymous complaints, but somehow that didn't make it into the language of the recommendation. So I think we might want to put in the memo that is our intention, that it would be possible to have anonymous complaints. And if that's the case, then you would not add this sentence that there always has to be a name, address, and phone number.
Very good, very good. All right.
My memory's wrong.
All right, so that takes care of section 30 then, complaint forms. And I just want to pause for a quick second and just make sure that the way that we're going about this is the best way we're doing it. And we can continue doing it this way unless anyone has any suggestions, because I know this is a very specific work. So I just want to check in with everyone and see how we're doing with that. Are we okay? Should we maybe make some changes?
You're
okay.
almost finished.
Well, I know, but it doesn't feel like it because we still got more work to do. But I'm going to have to maybe give up some duties for the next session to maybe my vice chair. Just heads up if you don't mind, so I can take a break, possibly, if that's okay. But I'll go ahead and move on to now we are at section 31. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, section 31, subsection A, and again, flag as additional duties. We'll move on past that one, unless someone has something to say about that. We'll get to we're still in section 29 and subsection C. And how will this be decided and communicated? Does anyone want to tackle that as far as the memorandum part, or leave it alone?
I don't think we need to clarify that. I don't think that needs to be in the ordinance. It says we can recommend changes. The commission can recommend changes. So I don't think that detail needs to be in there.
Okay. Not hearing from anyone else, I'll move on to section 32. And it looks like they don't want to strike it all out as far as extra duties for the police department. And we're going to move on from that, or do we want to make a comment about that section at all? No? Okay. So we're at section 33, pretty much the same thing. They just strike it all out. Is the city contemplating that the complainant will participate in the mediation or just the officer and the department? And then just below that, section C and D, again, concern about mandatory funding, discipline in the department will be covered by the collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah, I think this is a legitimate legitimately, the comment is at least to an extent, there's an ambiguity. Remember, originally we said between the police officer and the complainant, there will be mediation. And then at some point, somebody suggested that, the police department has to agree. So we added the police department. And I think that confuses the reader. So now we've got three people, the police department, the police officer, and the complainant. And we need to clarify that the mediation is between the police officer and the claimant and the complainant, not the claimant and the city. So we should probably make some clarification in that. I don't know whether that will eliminate the entire concern that the two attorneys have, but it will clarify it to some extent.
Understood. Commissioner Boyle?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is I don't think of, this section doesn't really describe a mediation process. I doubt that there's going to be mediation just between a police officer and a complainant. Both sides would have to agree. They've got collective bargaining rights. I just don't see that happening. There could be a complaint that's filed against the department generally that might be able to be mediated. But I think what I would suggest we do is, in response to these comments, just acknowledge that there are questions and comments about mediation, and that the committee supports the use of mediation where possible as a method of dealing with complaints, provided that all of the parties agree to mediation. So that would be the complainant, the department, and the individual officer, if necessary, to mediate the case. So I just put a general statement like that in, and not really try to fix this section.
I see Commissioner Williams nodding in agreement with that. I think he's okay with it, unless I'm mistaken by his body language there. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to section 35 then. Subsection D, I believe that collective bargaining agreement requires at least some action by the police department within 10 days after the occurrence or after learning of the occurrence. The collective bargaining agreement does not contemplate a dual investigation. And then making this as a whole, the second section there, G subsection, is the CBA collective bargaining agreement does not contemplate this. And then lastly, on subsection H, reporting employee discipline matters to MCOs may implicate the collective bargaining agreement. And we're leaving that alone with a 10-foot pole, correct? Okay.
I do have a question.
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm wondering whether we need to clarify what the commission's role or lack thereof is in the disciplinary process. Because my understanding when I came in and started listening to the discussions was that, the commission's not going to recommend discipline, the commission's not going to be involved in the discipline of individual employees. And if that's our intent, maybe we need to state that clearly.
Does anyone have any issues with stating that clearly in our memorandum for this section? I think we're good. I think it's a great suggestion, unless someone has a comment. All right.
Wait a minute.
Yes.
I don't know if there's a complaint process, policy complaints and disciplinary complaints against individual officers. The police department does its investigation, and between the time of the staff investigation and the police chief's report, the commission makes a recommendation to the police chief about what should happen. So now that is an involvement in discipline, if it's a disciplinary complaint. So it may be an overbroad statement to say that the commission is not involved in discipline. After the police chief decides to take disciplinary action, then the grievance procedure starts.
Right.
And I think we were trying to keep the commission out of the grievance procedure.
Can I jump in a second?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was about whether the substantiating a complaint or a finding of an investigation, but not discipline. So there's two parts. One is the internal investigation and whether it was substantiated, founded, not founded. The second part of that is separate, which is the issuance of discipline.
So what you're saying, discipline is what will happen to the police officer if something is substantiated.
Correct.
But not whether it's substantiated or not.
Correct.
Okay, if you want to draw the line there.
Distinctions, yeah.
If that's what discipline means, I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner Boyle, then Vice Chair Root, you're up.
Well, I'm just agreeing that that's my understanding, is that we wouldn't review any penalties imposed or lack thereof, or comment on that.
Okay. Discipline is penalties.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And then you have the time limits. There may be time limits in the collective bargaining agreement. And then we would have to squeeze our work in order to meet those time limits. So this would free us from that necessity.
Great.
Vice Chair Root, do you still want to chime in? All right, we'll move on. Thank you, City Manager. We'll go ahead and move on to Section 36, not contemplated by this collective bargaining agreement. We're going to move on unless someone wants to address that.
That's it.
Is that it? Yeah, that's it. Woo! All right. So Commissioner Boyle and Commissioner Williams, you got all that, and you're going to work amongst yourselves in your free time here, and we'll come back for our next meeting with all that kind of in play. Is that what we're doing now with that?
Well, Ms. Boyle seems to have a lot of ideas for the memo, so I'd be glad to let her write the memo, and I'll just look at it.
Well, that might work, but it might be better if you help me write the memo, because my word processing skills are very, very poor.
Okay.
So I could certainly use help with that.
You want me to do a draft?
Well, let's get together and decide what we're going to do. You and I can talk about it. I've got some notes that you might like to review before we really sit down and start to write it.
Okay. Because I have very few notes from tonight.
Well, I will get the minutes, but I had notes that I brought that I made before that we could look at, and then I've written notes tonight too. So.
All right.
Just, you know, I would, even though I wouldn't be helpful to your team, your duo there, I wouldn't mind sitting in and just, you know, listening into this and how you guys are coming up with this memorandum. I'm sure I can learn a lot and understand a lot of things that you're focusing on that we need to really make whole. So if you don't mind me just kind of sitting there as a fly on the wall, I would love to do that. If you can include me in whenever you do decide to do that, please. So I'll go ahead and move on outside of my personal interest on that. So we are at section 3.2, Vice Chair Root, would you mind just help me out just a little bit, maybe on the first couple of links there, and then I can jump back in if you want,
Sure.
or you can smash all the way
Sure.
through. It's up to you.
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you so much.
3.2 is dealing with our written report. And we have been planning all along that we would, affirm all the parts of the written report so that by the time it all gets put together, it is a true statement that it's a report from the study committee. Let me just give you a little report on the status of the different pieces. There are some things attached to the agenda tonight, which includes 2 chapters, chapters 2 and 3, which are about information about policing in East Lansing as it relates to interactions with community members. And chapter 3 is about the complaints, the history of complaint review. There also is, the last item is the appendix list draft as of today, which has 4 additional appendices compared to previous list that was provided at the last meeting. And then the 4th item there is something that Kelly has referred to, an item that she created this week, which will be the first appendix attached to the first chapter, which is a table of input by members of the community at our community meeting on March 29th. There are 2 chapters that are not included here. Chapter 1 is an intro that currently is 3 pages. It's meant to be short. Quentin did a draft of that chapter back in December. And so there's been a draft of some updated paragraphs since then. He started a new job today, so he is very busy. We don't have anything to have people look at yet, but somehow between Dr. Tyler and perhaps Sade and myself, who got started with the report at the beginning, we'll make sure that we get something by our next meeting. It is the shortest chapter. Then the other chapter, chapter 4, is Cedric's chapter. He and I did a little bit of back and forth this past week, and there are a couple of additional paragraphs that have been added which relate to 2 additional appendices also. 2 appendices from NACOL, which is the National Association dealing with what they refer to as civilian oversight. So it helps us to get up to date and to have that national perspective. And that's the document on what is meaningful civilian oversight, which we have sometimes referred to in our own deliberations. And we thought that the council might benefit from having it at their fingertips as well. So I just didn't have time to do all the reformatting of pagination and footnotes and stuff in chapter 4 because it didn't translate onto my computer very well, but it is done. So that's encouraging. So you can get it in plenty of time before the next meeting. We've now, at the beginning of this meeting, made clear that we will also be sending to the City Council a sort of package that's our draft recommendations, the comments from the 2 attorneys, and our memo of response. So that will all be packaged together. And we know that we'll be dealing with that at our next meeting because that final piece of the memo is something that's still going to be very, very important for us to look at closely. So what I'm hoping tonight with this section 3.2 of the agenda is I would appreciate it if people could look at the appendix list and see if they have any suggested additions of things they think should be somehow incorporated in what we provide to the council. And then I'll sort of go with the will of the body about whether you want to sort of affirm chapters 2 and 3, or whether you want to affirm all of the parts at our last meeting in 2 weeks from now. Any reactions? Cedric?
So just to go down the rabbit hole again. As I was reading over chapter 2 and looking at what would be page 158 of the agenda packet, and footnote 23. So this is the section where we're discussing the survey, the EPIC MRA survey. The footnote 23 notes that the report of the survey itself states that there were 51 African-American respondents, right? And there was specific discussion about the oversampling and all of those things. Since I have the raw data now, I have some questions about whether or not that's accurate. And in relation to that, continued questions about the methodology of the survey, not the distribution of the survey itself, but the analysis. So the survey as distributed according to EPIC had 39 questions, I believe. The raw data that got turned over appears to be missing 2 questions. I have no idea whether those questions were simply not asked, even though they were included on the survey instrument that was the final that was to be asked. So on the survey itself, there are a series of questions that ask, within the last 12 months, how often have you had encounters with ELPD of this nature? Question 29 asks, how many times have you had any contact with the ELPD for any other interactions, such as at a community meeting or simply talking with an officer while he or she was on patrol? And then question 30 asks as a follow-up whether or not they were satisfied with those interactions. It may be that the answer to question 29 was 0, that nobody had any interactions of those kind. Even if that's the case, it is completely inappropriate to just not mention that there were 2 questions included on the survey that we have absolutely no data for. There's just no explanation of what happened to those questions. That's my best guess, because even given the raw data, I had to sort of go back and map the columns in the data to what appeared to be the most likely questions that those columns were relating to, right? Because I got the survey and I got the data, and those numbers didn't match up. So now I have to figure out which column in the raw data corresponds to which survey question. And I think I did that successfully, which brings us to the other problem, which is when I run the frequencies on race tell us that 413 white individuals answered the survey and 34 African Americans answered the survey. 34 clearly not being 51, clearly not being an oversample. So I again have significant questions about what EPIC MRA was doing.
Thank you. My suggestion is that we not approve chapter 2 tonight, and that Cedric and I figure out what we think is appropriate to include in our report. Our report is obviously not a report about, not in significant part, a report about the survey. But we certainly do not want to make errors in what we say about the survey. That would be a very bad thing. So would you be willing to work with me on that, Cedric?
Yes, that's fine. But above
I would
and
appreciate
beyond
that.
I would think Epic should answer those questions at the very least, considering that the city council has now placed that survey and all those things on the city website.
Mhm.
Well, if there are specific questions you want us to provide to Epic, maybe the commission wants to generate a list of questions that we can ask Epic if they're can provide answers for them.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. Okay. Thanks again for pointing that out. I actually have a question about the appendices. I'm interested in the thoughts of the group about whether we should have an appendix, an additional appendix that gives very short bios, 2-3 lines about the members of the study committee to indicate the diverse types of expertise that are represented on this committee, which I think served us extremely well. And it might be useful to have a very, very brief documentation of that. I don't know what people think of that idea.
I like the idea. I think it'll expose me that I'm probably the least qualified to be here, but yeah, why not? I think it'd be good for us to have that in the appendages.
I like it. I'm good with it. I'm tickled because I'm like, good luck trying to get mine condensed.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. But I think it really helps people understand how we did our work. Could I ask people to send no more than 2 sentences to me, what they think belongs in such a very short bio about themselves that is relevant to our work together? Would that be a way to get a start at this? I know we're right at the end of this process, but how about that approach? Diane?
I don't mean to interrupt, but in the very first study committee meeting, there's a little bit about each person when they introduce themselves during the meeting. So that might be a good place to start.
Thanks for that reminder. Well, I could send that out to folks and then people could tell me what they'd like included in a written version with that as a prompt or something they want to revise. Okay, we'll see if this works, because I think it's helps to understand what we put together. Okay, so I think we are at a situation where we're going to sort of affirm all the parts at our next meeting, and that people can understand that I've been able to convey that we've made a lot of progress. There's still a little bit of work to do, but we're getting close. Okay. So shall we go on to the next section, which is new business, point 4.1, plan for our oral presentation to City Council. We have one more meeting together, and after that, there will be a presentation by representatives of the study committee to the City Council. And I am reminded that there was a committee that of 4 of us from the study committee that did a lot of work to prepare for the March 29th community meeting. And it showed. you know, we put a lot into it and we were really prepared for it when it took place. And so I'm thinking that that is evidence that it might be a good idea for a subcommittee to get together between now and our next meeting to plan what kind of presentation we would like to provide to the city council. And I see George wants to speak.
Yeah, to your point about the number of meetings, I think that you have until June 12. So if you did need an additional date, I think that that date exists for you, but that's of course up to the commission of what you think you need. But I believe the date that council approved for you to deliver your report is June 12, which if you kept with your sequence gives you June 7th as well. So I don't saying if you need it or not, I just believe that that is what was included. I can go back and look at the specific approval from council, but I believe they extended 2 months and that date is June 12th.
I thought our regular meetings were the second and fourth Tuesdays, Mondays, excuse me, and that would be a first Monday.
That's 2 weeks from the prior one, but you can set any meeting dates you want.
Okay.
You have to,
And-
your deadline to council would be June 12, so you could set meetings as you see fit.
Okay.
Meeting
Well, the
set-
other issue is, of course, that we need to not conflict with other meetings in terms of Zoom.
True.
Justin, would you be able to check that date of June 7 to see if there's any other city meeting that's already scheduled for that night?
Yes, there's currently something on the calendar from 6 to 8 by the Deputy Director of Public Works. So I'm assuming that's a commission on the environment or something.
Okay,
Thank you.
no mistake.
Yeah, I think we can do this.
Okay.
We work hard and we've worked under deadlines and we've been planning to get things finished at our next meeting. If we really aren't quite finished, we'll cope with that. But I think we can still try to finish on the 24th of May. Particularly if a couple people get together between now and then to think through what we want to say to council. You know, what we want to put into a written report, we've been working on for months and months and months. But we haven't really focused on what an oral presentation would look like. And so I think if we could collect any ideas people have tonight to inspire a small group, and then see if there are a couple of folks who would volunteer to be part of that group to do some more thinking before our next meeting. That's what I'm hoping we can do tonight. Chuck?
Yeah, I would agree with you in regards to having like a subcommittee work for the presentation, because as you said earlier, we had the community meeting based on some of that work, based on the stuff that we had, we brought it back to the whole group. We were, as you said, very prepared, and the quality level was really, really good. And I would love to be able to have the same effect in the oral presentation. So I support maybe getting a small group together in between so we can kind of have a plan of attack and it being effective.
Well, maybe we should ask who we think that committee should be. For the community meeting, we had 4 people. So we can go up to 4, I think. Kelly? Oh, I thought you were, who would like to speak? Cedric?
I'm just going to say this out loud. I had a previous conversation with Commissioner Williams, and I think he's open, if something hasn't changed for him personally, he's jumping in with that as well. I think I'm involved by default, but I would love to have, at least 4 of us meeting and getting prepared for what we bring back to the group. That doesn't necessarily mean that the 4 people, and there may be another person who may end up doing a presentation as well, We're just really talking about how we want to do it and structure it. So when we come back to the overall group, if someone wants to jump in there and do that, I think it would be very, very effective. And I think the more people we have doing it with their backgrounds, the better presentation can be. So it doesn't have to be exclusive to the 4 or 3 or whoever's meeting in between. And I just wanted to clarify that up, if that makes sense, and what you were thinking, Vice Chair, as well.
That sounds good. I'd like to be on the planning group too. So that would be Chuck, Eric, and myself. There's room for a 4th person, if there's anybody who feels motivated to help with that. Cedric, would you like to? You're on. Okay, so inspire us. Does anybody have thoughts about how to be clearest and most persuasive to the City Council? How should that work? What themes should be touched on? Do we need a PowerPoint? What should we ask for them to, in terms of what kind of presentation we'd like to give them? Any kinds of ideas at all, process or content? Chuck?
Please go ahead, Commissioner Elverson.
I was just going to suggest that maybe the core group, your working group that you have, that you guys kind of work out those details.
Sure.
If someone has some thoughts, they can just certainly shoot them your way.
Sure.
But that your group best work it out, because if you're going to be the ones presenting, you don't want to have someone on the sidelines giving you an idea on how to present, and it may not be in your wheelhouse or comfort zone.
Okay. Well, people would certainly be open to receiving suggestions from folks, I'm sure, people on that committee. Okay. So the May 24th meeting, which is 0.42 on our business agenda tonight, we're going to agree to the memo that Eric and Kathy will bring to us and will get to us in advance of that meeting. We're going to agree to all the sections of the written report, and we will hear back from the planning committee for the presentation to council, so that there can be an opportunity for some feedback on that. Are there other things that we need to do or wish to do, assuming that this would be our last gathering together? I wish we all could go out to a restaurant together afterwards, you know? It's really extraordinary that we've done all this work without ever meeting in person. And it's kind of a shame. Okay. Anything else for tonight for the good of us all, or are we ready to adjourn? Kelly?
I just wanted to update this body. At the last meeting, I brought up a recommendation on qualified immunity. And so Commissioner Williams and I, we've had some, phone conversation and a lot of back and forth on the email. There are some different approaches that we're looking at, but because of the tight deadline of this work that needs to get done and get to City Council, there's some additional options that we're exploring on how we might be able to present some other thoughts separate from qualified immunity. And so it may be just working directly with the permanent seated commission, but I'm happy to at least get those ideas over to everyone so that you have time to even review it and have some thoughts that you can weigh in on as we flush this out further. So I just wanted to give you an update. It's not anything that was forgotten about. It's just, how much time will be needed to really flush some of these other thoughts out. So I just wanted to give you that update, that was not something that was forgotten about, but there is some conversation that's been taking place on this. So, and I want to thank Commissioner Williams, and I'll be back in touch, but thank you for commiserating with me on this.
That was a commissioner comment, commissioner announcement, which I had forgotten on our agenda. Thank you, Kelly. Any other commissioner announcements? Chuck?
Yes, thank you. I will second, it is a shame that we have not got a chance to be in person. And we've gotten this done over technology, pretty amazing feat. And I'm just proud, like I always say, of being a part of this with you all. I had a question for Deputy Chief Gonzalez and Chief Johnson. We've been meeting here for quite a bit, and we need a lot of your input earlier on in this process, and it kind of has shifted away to some of the things we've been doing. And I just really want to get, if you will, a temperature check about kind of what you're thinking on our recommendations, some of the different conversations we've had with and about you in your departments, and just kind of, I think it's important to maybe hear from you a little bit as we go into these last meetings, and just kind of really wrap things up in some ways, because we have been working together. I hope that you would view it that way, and I just want to understand, what you're thinking right now in regards to where we're at and what we've come up with overall. I know it's kind of open-ended question, but I'm curious to know if there's anything, if you have any thoughts about anything at all.
Good evening, Chair. I appreciate your time and your willingness to gather our input on your work. And I can't speak for the Deputy Chief, and he'll speak in a few minutes, but I personally feel that the commission or your temporary committee has all the best interests at heart. This is trying to make the department better. And so from our standpoint, at least from my standpoint, I'm not giving much input just because I'm going to look at the recommendations. I'm going to see what council has to say, and we will abide by what the council and what this committee comes up with, and what the full commission comes up with. We have to work within we have to work in a new environment, and our department will deal with those recommendations, and we will incorporate what's been approved. And so, I appreciate the hard work. It's been tough, like you said, Chair, reference dealing with everything online and things like that. So I do commend your whole committee for the work that they did. But so, we don't, we're not in a position to say yay or nay or anything like that. The only thing I do know is that everyone has the best interest at heart is trying to serve the community in the best way possible. And your charge has been dealing with the police department in particular, and we are open to the recommendations that the committee and the full commission comes up with along with council. So sorry for being so in the middle of the road, but that's the best I can do, being the boss in the police department right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, from my angle, I would echo a lot of what the chief said. I think everybody here in the room, the virtual room, has the best interest of the community at heart and the best interest of the police department at heart, because at the end of the day, the police department exists to serve the East Lansing community. When we retook a look at our mission, our vision, and our value statement, one thing stands out: that we provide quality service, protection, and safety to the city. Those are. It's a quick phrase to say, and it can sound to an extent. It can sound like just key touch words that are easy to roll off when someone says, "What are you here for?" But that's really what we are here for. I often say that when we look at our mission statement, you should be able to take a look at your job and apply anything that you're doing to that mission, whether it's 4 o'clock in the morning, whether it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I know that sounds idealistic, admittedly, but I really think and believe in that. When it comes to the specific recommendations that the commission has been going through, again, I think they're being put in place to move the police department forward. And I do appreciate that at the beginning of this process, the commission asked for our input. You know, we did several presentations for the commission, and I thought that was extremely important to get that information out quick and early, because policing is a very specialized profession, and to ask relevant questions, get relevant information, I thought was important, which then, you know, can inform the commission's recommendations moving forward. And, you know, again, at the end of the day, we're all going to work together to push this forward and work within the construct that the commission is created within. So I appreciate your asking and asking for input.
I just want to say thank you, because I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to be involved with something like this and having us talk about so many different things. And I know generally you have a lot of pride and professionalism in being able to sit here and work with us. And I didn't take that participation or your willingness to work with us lightly. And so I just want to commend all the staff, you know, City Manager Lahanas, Diane, Justin, Shelley, Chief Johnson, Deputy Chief Gonzalez, Elaine Hardy, all of your participation in a way that really, I think, has helped us tremendously to get to where we're at right now. And I just don't know if that would happen in other places. And so I just want to acknowledge that. I know everything's not perfect, and we got a lot of work to do going forward. And I know this is, I think, a great step in the right direction in some ways with things you were already doing and had already incorporated. But I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank you for your comments, because I think it's still important to be able to understand, you know, the people that have been in this room with us and about how they feel about it, especially you as the leaders of the Public Safety Department in regards to that. So I'll stop there with all that, and that's all I have for Commissioner comments.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Helen.
Okay, one last thing, and then we can all say goodnight. So I emailed Chairperson Chuck about my absence for Hawaii. I'll still most likely be able to hop on the calls, but there is a 6-hour time difference.
Yeah.
And I think I can get Mondays off, but I'm going to be working in Hawaii from like next week all through August, but I'm going to try my best to be present. I just wanted to give everyone a heads up just in case I don't show up to a meeting.
Great. Thank you. It would be great for you to be at the last meeting, but we'll understand if you're out hoeing or something.
Somebody's got to go to Hawaii. May as well be you.
Any other comments or announcements? Okay. Well, we've got a lot of work to do by our next meeting, which is something we are accustomed to, I would say. Anybody wish to move to adjourn? Kelly moves that we adjourn. Is there a second? Helen, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye. All right. We are adjourned, and good night to everybody.